The What to Read Next podcast helps you build a TBR of each your favorite books. In each episode, Lori and Maine interviews authors and book influencers to recommend books they loved for you to pick up today. If you're an avid reader, always looking for your next great read, then the show. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to What to Read Next podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So happy to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Godfrey, and I'm an author living in the Bay Area in California. My first novel, A Very Typical Family, which is women's fiction and set in Santa Cruz, California, was published last September. And it's having what I like to call a fun paperback summer.
Yeah.
And my second book is The Second Chance Hotel, and that publishes in September this year. It's a rom-com and it's set in Greece.
So talk to us about the research of writing a rom-com set in Greece.
Well, I got the idea because I spent time living in Greece when I was a kid. So I think there was always probably a story in me that I really wanted to set in Greece. My mom and I lived in Santorini for a couple of years when I was around 10. And so I didn't want to set anything in Santorini because the island has changed so much over the years and it's become very crowded and very full of tourists, even more so than when we were there. But I definitely wanted to capture the sights, sounds, smells, colors, everything about what I remember. So I felt like I really wanted to set someone's experience and story against that backdrop. And who doesn't love Greece? Who doesn't want to read about Greece? So and then the idea came to me. I was sitting in traffic one day. I remember this. And I was listening to the radio and I heard this story. They were doing a news story on this couple. This is real, that had gotten married and they took their honeymoon on some island. It wasn't a Greek island. And they got really, really drunk one night, and they had been friends with the hotel's owner that they were staying at. And somehow they agreed during that night to buy the hotel from the owner, and they couldn't get out of it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what a situation. And I thought, what if that really happened? And then I kind of put it with a marriage of convenience trope, which I adore. I've always wanted to write that kind of story. And this Second Chance Hotel was born.
Oh my gosh, I love this story. And I love the story is like basically, like what if, you will buy a hotel?
What if my mind goes to, oh my gosh, what do you do? Well, you try to get out of it. First of all, that would be my first inclination. And of course, I think anybody would be like, I'm not sticking around for that. But, in the Second Chance Hotel, I really wanted to bring the other people living on the island in and really make it not just about what's happening to this couple and the mistake they made, but about the whole island, the whole other people living there. And so really they end up working and trying to make a go of it for the island and for the other people living there.
Oh my gosh. All right. So what kind of reading, let's talk about your writing. What led you to start writing? You mentioned you had stories to tell, was it just like this inkling, like, I have a story to tell and I might as well just do it because why not? Or was it something that you're just like, it kept bugging you? You're like, okay, let's just put it on paper.
Yeah, that's essentially it. I've always been a writer. I've written stories since I was very little. I actually found a bunch of letters that I had written my dad when my mom and I were living in Greece. They were divorced at that time. So my dad was still in California, and he saved all of my letters that I wrote him. And he gave them to me recently. And it was so amazing reading those and reliving, what we were doing and going through while we were living in Santorini. But one of the letters said was, Dear Dad, I've written a new book and it's my best yet. And I can't wait for you to read it. And I was like 10. I'm like, oh my God, I have no idea what that book was, but that's so cute. But yeah, I think I've always written stories. I didn't start writing novels seriously until I was around 30. Yeah. I just don't think I had grown up enough to have the wherewithal to know what I wanted to say. But writing has been for me a way to make sense of the world. And I think that's always going to be a little bit of a part of it. So, yeah.
I love this. Yeah, I love like I didn't become a writer until I would say like in my late 20s, and I'm a journaler. That's how I do excavate in the inner world. And
Wow.
so it's a practice that is like it makes sense. It's a way to make sense of the world. It's a way to make sense of like how things are. It's problem solving. And
It is, yeah.
it's
It
like
structures these chaotic thoughts sometimes.
yeah. Yeah, it soothes my anxiety. And I'm like, oh, like what if I like look at fiction and nonfiction and try to figure out like if there's it's just like the action of just getting, get out of the way and just put it on paper. Whether you read
That's
or
it.
don't read it, it's whether it's bad or not good, it doesn't matter. It's just like getting it out of your head, that action.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it exactly.
So let's talk about your reading life. What kind of books do you tend to read?
Yeah, I read what I like to write. I love reading women's fiction and rom-com, and those it's just so comforting and enjoyable. And even if it's a trope I've read before, I love it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So favorite tropes. I know you mentioned marriage and convenience, but any other tropes that you're like, oh my gosh, or catnip, like I must read, just give it to me.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for marriage and convenience. I think I do love an enemies to lovers. I love friends to lovers. I
Yeah.
really love that slow burn.
Mm.
And I think a slow burn is really hard to do. And, to successfully make it slow enough, but interesting and tension filled enough to hold the reader's interest, I think is a skill. So
Yeah.
I love a slow burn.
I love it. All right. Do you have any books to recommend our listeners to pick up?
Yeah, I do. I absolutely loved La Vie According to Rose by Lauren Parvizi that just came out in early July. I adore this story. It's about a woman who works hard for everyone but herself, and she decides to take a trip to Paris. And it's very similar to mine in that it's a travel based, and of course chaos ensues for the heroine in
Yeah.
Paris, but it's really transformative, and it's a great story of grief and new beginnings and Paris. So I love that one. One Summer in Savannah by Tara Shelton Harris. Loved this. This is a unique story about a woman who returns to her hometown years after being sexually assaulted, but with her daughter, who's the product of that experience. And so this story is such an interesting take on what forgiveness means and this
Mhm.
concept, and kind of twists it on its head. It's so good. Um, Also loved Someone Just Like You by Meredith Shore. That publishes on July 25th.
Yep.
That's a great enemies to lovers rom-com. So I ate it right up. Takes place in New York City. Just so fun. These two childhood enemies have to work together on an anniversary party for their parents, and sparks are just flying off the page. Loved that one. The Deja Glitch by Holly James, that publishes on August 1st. This is a super fun time loop story set in LA, all over LA. And it's very sweet. And I loved how it was told through the eyes of someone not in the time loop, so to speak.
Mhm.
So, the male love interest has lived the day countless times, but the female heroine, she hasn't. So that's a really fun one. And then the last one that I most recently read that it was just very different for me was called My Murder by Katie Williams. I
Mhm.
totally devoured this story. It's about a government cloned woman who was murdered by a serial killer, and the government's like, okay, we're going to bring you back. This is in a distant future where they have the technology to do so. And her clone has all her memories, so she is her, but she's also not her. And she wants to find out more about her murder, and of course runs into surprises. So
Oh my God, that I am fascinated by that book. It's not like my wheelhouse, but I'm like, oh yeah, I would
yeah.
love to read this.
Yeah, yeah,
But
same. And again, it's great. It's about a strong female character who's
yeah,
just trying to figure things out.
yeah. Make sense of the world. Again.
Yeah, make sense of the world. That's it.
Oh my gosh. Does she have the memories about her death, or is that blocked out?
No. So that was an interesting thing about that book. They made it so the author made it so that you could the cloning would only get all your memories up until like 2 weeks before your death. So the murder is a big gray area, which is a really good plot device because
Yeah, I
she's
can
trying to figure it out.
I will be like, okay, let's trace back those 2 weeks. Like, who did what?
Yeah,
Because it will
that's
be.
it. That's it
I would
exactly.
imagine it'll be incredibly traumatic, like to remember that specific memory. Like
Yeah,
so.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome. Sierra, tell us where you can find you online.
You can find me at sierragodfrey.com, and I'm at Sierra Godfrey on all the socials, Instagram, Threads now,
Yeah,
Twitter, as long as Twitter's around.
sounds good. Thank you, Sarah, for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share with friends, subscribe, rate, and review the show. This is the easiest way to support the podcast. For a list of books mentioned and other book recommendations, please visit watchrenexblog.com. Thank you so much for listening and happy reading.